episode 15 and it's replay to be advised.
Hello, welcome again to the Valley's People. Thanks for joining us today because we have a man from Teralba who for the past 20 years or so has been fighting to preserve some of the things within the Hunter Valley for posterity. He's been actually fighting to save our swamps. And then from Martinsville, a lady who's so well known on national television, had her own show, was part of the Mavis Bramston show, but above all things, likes to get down there back to the farm. Hope you can stay.
Stand by again.
Sorry, a little knowledge. The Valley's People today. My first guest is a man who's now Vice President of the Newcastle Flora and Fauna Society. He was a past President, and he spent some 20 years of his life trying to save our swamps. And that's John Dorman. Welcome to the Valley's People, John. You're saving our swamps from what? Or from whom?
Well, I think that there are several things. Firstly, the council in Lake Macquarie Shire, for instance, were about to convert most of the swamps of Lake Macquarie to garbage tips. That was back in about 1967 or thereabouts.
Right.
Industry is another one, and practically the whole of Newcastle Hamilton is built on swampland. So the Hunter was one of the most significant areas of swamps in the past. Today there's still a fair amount left there, but not nearly as much as there used to be.
Well, after this agitation then, what swamps have you saved? Firstly, Lake Macquarie?
Lake Macquarie was one of our big wins. In 1969, I think it was. The State Planning Authority, the local director here, asked me for a report on the swamps of Lake Macquarie because he was concerned about the possibility of them being filled in. I'd originally converted him to it about 1965, I think, when he was considering the Hexham swamp, both the airfield and industry in Hexham. And I'd mentioned to him then that it just wasn't on. I think he started thinking after that, so when the Lake Macquarie considered it, he asked me for a report, and fortunately the council's come good.
Because we've been through that generation where everybody wanted to tidy everything up, and the swamp is the most untidy area. I think I know part of the answer to this question I'm about to ask, but nowhere near intricately like such as yourself. But why save the swamp? What is there that we must save for generations to come?
Lots of things about swamps, I think, Ron. To me, aesthetically, they're very pleasant, and I'm talking about all sorts of swamps. You've got
a pleasant swamp.
Yes,
that's all in the eyes of the beholder, isn't it? Yes.
Most people think of them mosquito-ridden or eerie or smelly or all these sorts of things. But to me, swamps have got quite a lot of positive values. Some very beautiful areas in swamps. At the same time, it's not the sort of place normally that you go round unless you're dressed for it.
Right. But what about the swamp, though? What's in there that we've got to save for the future?
There are many things. They're the home of most of our waterfowl, most of the water birds. They can't live without them. And if we destroy the ones in the Hunter and similar places along the coast, we can virtually write off a goodly proportion of our ducks and all sorts of water birds that mostly breed in the inland but come across to the coast during the summer stresses. They depend upon these. They act as flood mitigation areas. You know, they fill up in flood time. And then they're also important in the food chain of many animals.
Somebody said that you were especially interested in the mangrove swamp, that you were in fact the mangrove swamp specialist. Of all the swamps, you like the mangrove most. What's about a mangrove?
Whilst I wouldn't particularly say that I was more one than the other, mangroves certainly are are an area of particular concern, because mangroves are perhaps the most productive of all of the types of areas that you can get on the Earth's surface. The fact that they live on the border between the sea and the land and can exist where there's plenty of nutrients from the seawater, they can utilise these and feed them back into the food chain of animals. Most of the fish at some stage are dependent upon the mangrove swamps. I'm not saying that they wouldn't be there at all if it were not there, but the leaves of the mangroves fall and provide part of the food chain for the crabs and the smaller animals, snails and so forth, which in turn become part of the food chain for the fish.
Well, expressed like that, John, you can visualise the amount of damage that has been done to mangrove swamps in the Hunter Valley over many generations.
Yes, fortunately mangroves are fairly resilient. They can put up with a fair amount of pollution, but they get too much, of course, and they've had it too. But it's interesting, I think, to have a look at the Hunter, the mangrove areas in the Hunter, and there's some very significant ones, where in industry, for instance, can be quite close to them and no significant damage done, providing the industry doesn't pour out too much pollution.
You mean birds and industry can thrive in the same area, such as a Kooringang Island or likewise?
Kooringang Island, I think, is perhaps the most significant of our areas. Kooringang and the associated Fullerton Cove and Hexham swamps provide our largest mangrove area in the Hunter. The birds live there quite happily, quite close to industry, and the noises and the smokes and the smells of industry don't seem to disturb them unduly.
Well, what is all this stirring and agitation from flora and fauna over, since 1960 it was formed, was it?
1960 the association was formed.
Yes, so what have
65.
What have you been able to achieve in that time along these lines?
In fauna and flora generally, or in swamps in particular?
Well, no, flora and fauna in general.
We've had some fairly significant wins. I mentioned the swamps of Lake Macquarie. We're part way to winning the Kooringang issue. The Awabakal Nature Reserve at Redhead, Dudley was one of our most significant areas that we've gained. What
were you aiming to preserve there? Was that just an area of land, but what intrinsically was it about it? Any species at all involved there?
There was a little new Holland Mouse which had been missing for many, many years. Was found up about Port Stephens about 4 or 5 years before we found it again there. But I think ours was about the second or third find in about in the space of about 80 years that had been missing. I think it largely been missing because it's so tiny and it doesn't, it's not readily found unless you're looking for them. It's a delightful little fellow, fit readily in the palm of your hand, about the size of an ordinary house mouse, a bit fatter, and beautiful, fine grey fur, and large, beady eyes. It's a beautiful thing.
It's good to see something coming from efforts such as that. Environmental protection and the work of the Flora and Fauna Society, I guess, is something we could talk about for a long while. But I was thinking as you were just responding there to one of my questions that there's been, even in this generation, I suspect, not being an expert, but I suspect even in this generation, there has been a change of attitude. If you wanted to divide the decades, say the 1960s, the 1970s, and then looking forward to the 1980s, attitudes have changed within the community. Would you think that? And if you do think that, how would you express those 3 decades?
Well, certainly they have, Ron. In the 60s, one needed to be a bit of a nut to be in it, you know.
Really?
What, his fellow man?
Yes.
That's how he was regarded. People, certainly people in authority, and I'd suggest probably in all walks of life in those days, wondered what the devil we were on about. They virtually brushed us aside without a second thought, you know. It took a good 10 years, and that history goes back a bit before that, of course. Except when you get back to Banks' time and Cook's time, it was well and truly in then.
Yeah, we started well, didn't we?
Yes, we started well. We missed out though somewhere along the line. In the 70s, suddenly there was a burst of interest, and without a doubt the 70s saw the booming of conservation. Everybody jumped on the bandwagon. I think that government and industry began to wake up. They fought back, of course, and the 80s have seen the time, I think, when they're beginning to realise that, in fact, what we're talking about makes common sense.
But a lot of what you're doing, though, depends on what the interaction or reaction from other people, such as councillors. Have we got enough councillors with vision now to take us into the 80s?
Well, there are signs that this, too, has improved, Ron. The planning departments of local government and state have made major strides in the last 10 years. I think the individual officers in them have got their heart in it, and I think that the next 10 years will see quite a decided improvement in the quality of life that that's providing the planners are given the go. But I think that, in fact, it's heading that way.
And that's quite a mouthful for a society which was only formed really in 1960 in this area. So John Dorman, thank you very much for the work you're doing and the work of the other members of the society, and I guess you can look forward to our grandchildren thanking you also.
Thank you,
John Dorman, Flora and Fauna Society of New South Wales and the Newcastle branch. And welcome back to the Valley's people. Our second guest today is someone that you've seen many times. In fact, you've seen her in a variety of roles. On television, just about every character that you could come up with, but also as a stage actress as well. In fact, she's just finished, recently, some 6 weeks ago, a star performance in The Merry Wives of Windsor, and that's Carol Raye. I think it may come as a surprise, Carol, for a lot of people to know that you're part of the Hunter Valley, very much so.
Well, I've been part of the Hunter Valley, well, we bought our little farm 4 years ago, but we've only lived here 2 years. But,
Martinsville.
Yes, Martinsville, and it's just beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I have yet to see all the Hunter Valley. It's a very big area. Well,
Yes.
You most probably know better than me now.
Beautiful area. And has some wonderful people in it, such as yourself. Because in The Merry Wives of Windsor, which is a Shakespearean role, I just wonder how Shakespeare would have felt about having women these days.
I think he was lucky to get us. Actually, I know what you mean, Ron, because in his day, when he wrote all the Elizabethan plays, they were all the women's roles were played by men. It was considered completely impossible for a woman to be an actress, but
Never
things
put
have
your daughter
changed.
on the stage.
No, but in fact, you see, many actresses nowadays feel this is why, one of the reasons anyway, we love doing Shakespeare's plays, because he wrote the parts for men as women. They're very good roles. Without being enormously feminist, I mean, women don't come off all that well in plays. You look at any play, you see that many more roles for men and better roles on the whole, except the classics.
Yes.
And of course Shakespeare's one of those. But we were doing The Merry Wives of Windsor, which was a wonderful romp, lovely bawdy.
Maybe it's because men are usually villains in these plays, they get a better part.
Well, not that. I think, actually there's a very big scene going on in Sydney now where a whole group of 60 top actresses have got together to try and start a women's theatre, because having done a breakdown over the past, well, over all Australia and all the major theatre companies, the number of roles played by women, the number of plays written by women, the number of plays directed by women are very small. I don't see a woman cameraman on the floor today.
But Carol, you're talking about the stage, and also, though, I mean, your neighbours know you as a farmer. How does someone with such a stage background become so fascinated by the land?
Well, that's simple, really, because I married a vet. I mean, I've been married 29 years this year. In fact, I said to my husband in October, our wedding anniversary was, I think that maybe I should get some sort of medal for hanging in there, a medal for being married so long. No, I have a lovely husband who is a vet, and I started my married life, actually, farming in Africa. My husband joined the colonial service after we married, and we spent the first 10 or 11 years of our life in Kenya with my husband running a government experimental farm. It wasn't ours, but he was running it, and so I was living on a farm up in the beautiful Rift Valley in Kenya in East Africa. So I'm very used to farming, but of course my friends from way back in our lives would know that, but of course my Australian friends, who would have only seen me as a sort of working actress out of Sydney, were a little surprised and said, "Oh, what will you do?" You know.
Were you farming before your marriage, Carol?
No, although I've always had a love of the country, and my father was in the Navy, but my mother and my father both loved the country, and when I was a small girl, we always went in England to country places like Devon and Cornwall and stayed on farms. And I always had animals, not domestic animals, but dogs and cats and things, and horses. And so when I met my vet, and he took me off to, when Robert and I first met, I was very successful in the London theatre and making movies and things. And so that was quite a transition. When we married and went off to live in Africa, and I gave up the theatre completely for a while because the Mau Mau emergency was on, and I couldn't even get up to Nairobi, where I might have been able to do a little bit of theatre. And I had my babies there, and so farming sort of, that bit of going onto the land was a bit of a break from the London bright lights of theatre, but it soon got to me and I loved it.
What a background, though, if you were in London theatre and, of course, farm in Rhodesia. But weren't you married in America?
Oh, yeah, that's too complicated. Have you got like 3 days when I tell you the story of my life? Yes, actually we were married in America. My husband had done his veterinary training and qualified as a vet in England. And then he got then he went to Cambridge for 3 years and did a pure agriculture course there and qualified as an agriculturalist. And while he was at Cambridge, he became fascinated with tropical agriculture and animal husbandry, and he got a scholarship, a Fulbright scholarship, and went to the University of Louisiana down in the deep south, and he took a degree there. And I was working, when he got the scholarship, I was playing the lead in a musical in London, in the theatre there, and we just couldn't be married then. He was a penniless vet, but the moment the show was over, we realized we couldn't go on being apart. He'd gone ahead of me. So I flew over. In fact, I went by sea then. It wasn't quite as easy to fly. Went by sea and got on a train in New York and went down to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, arrived at 5:30 in the morning, and we were married that evening and had a year in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and that was something. Oh, our honeymoon. Have you got time to hear about our honeymoon?
Well, just some of the detail will do.
Well, just thinking about it then, I mean, it really was the transition for me. I literally had come straight from starring at the Phoenix Theatre in London, in the West End, in this musical, went by sea over to America, married my vet, and he was on this grant, so he didn't have any money, and you couldn't take money out of England then. There were restrictions on currency removal. So we were very poor, and Robert had taken time off from the university but couldn't afford a proper honeymoon, and an American veterinary friend of his had said, look, I've got this cabin, you know, down the bayou. It's a shooting lodge. And we had visions of shooting lodge like you have in England, in Scotland, you know, all that. Well, of course, when we arrived there, we got in this old car my husband had bought for like $75, and as we arrived, having been married, outside, we found our way through the bayous. Of the southern bayous are more deserted and isolated, and hound dogs are going, oh, you know. Oh, it was really quite frightening. And as we arrived, we got two, not one, two flat tires, so we couldn't have driven away. And this cabin, he was a bachelor, this American vet friend of my husband's, and it was awful. I mean, there was a fridge with the door hanging off, and the bed, the bed was like this, and I sat on it and burst into tears and said, what have I done, leaving the theatre and marrying you, coming here? And that collapsed onto the floor. It was absolutely hideous. Anyway.
It sounds something like a setting from the Mavis Bramston show. Well, how did you get those?
Good preparation for Bramston, yes. I can
How did you
tell
get those fantastic characters? Someone with your background, for a start, Carol. How did you come up with one of those characters who was just so typically suburban Australia?
Oh, in the Bramston show?
Yes.
Well, I think as an actor you do have quite an ear, you know, and I hadn't been here very long, too true, when we started the Bramston show. In fact, I joined Channel 7 3 weeks after we arrived in Australia, and 3 months later we were doing Bramston. But there's that lovely Aussie accent, which you're talking about, the suburban.
Yes.
Well, you see,
Almost
you get
once
once you get the key to accents or sounds. I noticed that there was a type of Australian voice that made every statement a question. And once you get that, instead of saying, make a statement, right, I'm now going to tell you about my life, you say, I'm now going to tell you about my life. And so it develops from that. And so these lovely little Aussie ladies would all get there with their washing machines and, I don't know, all those Aussie bits we did. But accents, again, like Indian accents, the Indians roll their tongues back. This is not Bramston, but I mean, it's that key you find. And so if you roll your tongue back and then start to say something, you get partly that way of talking that the Indians do, you see. But I had a lot of characters in Bramston.
Yes, you were sort of at home with the English lady, weren't you?
Oh,
the news reporter.
Aileen Richards.
Yes.
Oh, well, she was based on fact. There was a program called This Week in Britain, which I think still goes on, and they rush round the countryside with a microphone saying, hello there, this week I'm down in the little Suffolk village and this bed is where Cromwell slept in. And so we did a takeoff on that, and I used to rush around Australia as Aileen Richards, hello there. And I had a huge microphone. This week we're in Perth, or this week, and then we'd send the location up. We did a terrible thing on Melbourne and the Yarra and the Opera House, and just everywhere we went.
You were very quick to spot the migrant too, weren't you, in that series?
Oh, yeah, well,
the accent.
I had a marvellous migrant character who was very North Country. She was all like that, and she had a little husband who didn't say much, and she kept saying, well, you tell them, Albert, you tell them, and he never said a word, you know, speak up, he's got a mind like a steel trap, he's lovely, he's lovely. Oh, that was fun.
Yes. People tend to put into a period of time things like, say, the Goon Show being slightly ahead of its humour time.
Yes,
Mavis Bramston,
yes.
I guess, fits that category, being slightly ahead of time, but...
I think we were in Australia,
Yes.
in fact, because when we first started, we went to air live, and that was quite something, you know. But it was a stunning show, and it was a first of its kind, and I think a lot of things have developed from that.
Yes, at least it gave us the chance to see the many sides of Carol Raye. I suppose that's one thing. What's the main interest now, apart from farming and taking your place in the theatre when it comes along? What
Well,
else
the Hunter Valley is now home, and a very important part, because my children are grown up, so now I can indulge myself with my work and do the things that I really want to do. And theatre is really a great love, like it is for all actors. So I'm able to between my various professional engagements, come back home to the Hunter, to the farm. Future plans, actually I've knocked back quite a lot of things because I've been working the last 18 months consistently with Travelling North, a wonderful Williamson play, and Merry Wives, and now I'm just going to sit on the farm until, let's say, towards the end of January. And there's two very, very interesting projects coming up for next year, one in the theatre and one in television, which are on the boil at the moment. So
Summer hibernation, Martinsville.
just sit there, just sit there.
Fantastic, Carol. Thank you very much for being with us today. I'll be back in just a moment.
Each other, and you go to a wide shot. Okay, so you do your sign off,
Oh, yes. See you
and
again.
then
Yeah.
just keep talking. And Peter will cue you.
Well, certainly two totally different guests today. John Dorman from Teralba, who's been in flora and fauna in our Hunter Valley since 1960. And then, of course, Carol Raye, who's trying to convince us that she's settling down on the farm at Martinsville. I hope you can join us again in our next program, where we meet two more interesting people from this valley of ours. Goodbye for now.